All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're talking about TikTok. You know it, you've probably used it, but what you might not know is the incredible story of how this app, this massive cultural force, came just inches away from being completely banned here in the United States. It's a wild story about data, about national security, and some really high-stakes politics. So, to really understand why this whole fight got so intense, you gotta start with one single massive number: 200 million. That's right, 200 million Americans. That's how many people in the US are on this app. And for so many of them, it's way more than just silly dance videos, right? It's their main source of entertainment, it's how small businesses find customers, and for a lot of people, it's a genuine tool for free expression. It's really become a huge part of American life. Which brings us to the big question. If it's so popular, so woven into the economy and culture, why on earth did the US government, and we're talking Democrats and Republicans, come together to try and shut it down? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down right now. When you peel back all the layers of this thing, the whole conflict really boils down to just two words: national security. Let's dig into exactly why Washington was so spooked by a social media app. See, the big issue for US officials wasn't really the app itself, it was about who owns it. TikTok's parent company is a tech giant called ByteDance, and they're based in Beijing, China. And in the world of geopolitics, believe me, that location changes everything. Okay, and this right here is the legal hook that had everyone in Washington so concerned. China passed this national intelligence law back in 2017, and it is crystal clear. It says any Chinese company or citizen has to support, assist, and cooperate with state intelligence. For US security officials, that meant ByteDance would have absolutely no legal way to say no if the Chinese government demanded they hand over all of TikTok's American user data. So what's the worst that could happen? Well, US intelligence agencies laid out some pretty scary scenarios. They were worried about everything from spying on US government workers, to using personal data for blackmail, to manipulating that famous TikTok algorithm to push propaganda, and even the potential to control people's devices through the app. And look, this wasn't some fringe theory. The concern went all the way to the top. The FBI director, Christopher Wray, he went before Congress and said it flat out. China could use TikTok to collect data and influence millions of Americans. When the director of the FBI says that, lawmakers listen. They take it very, very seriously. With those fears basically boiling over, Washington decided it had to do something. And that kicked off this incredibly dramatic countdown, with a huge new law, a showdown at the Supreme Court, and a clock that was literally ticking towards a nationwide shutdown of the app. Congress passed something called the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act, or PAFACA for short. And just look at how unified they were. I mean, check out those votes. 352 to 65 in the House, 79 to 18 in the Senate. You just don't see that kind of bipartisan agreement anymore. The message was simple: either sell the company to an American owner or get banned. When that law passed in April 2024, it set off a total firestorm. TikTok sued, of course, but the case rocketed all the way to the Supreme Court, which on January 17, 2025, sided with the government, unanimously. The very next day, it actually happened. The app went dark. People remember it as the one-day ban. But just as the chaos was starting, President Trump, on his very first day in office, signed an executive order, basically hitting the pause button for 75 days. But that first delay? Yeah, that was just the beginning. The rest of 2025 was basically just this series of extensions. The Trump administration kept pushing the deadline back, again and again, trying to give negotiators time to figure out a deal, all while this threat of a permanent ban was just hanging over everyone's head. After all that drama and all those delays, they finally did it. In early 2026, they hammered out a deal, a really complex agreement that was designed to, well, Americanize the app and finally put those national security fears to rest. So here's how they structured it. They created this whole new independent American company called TikTok USDS. ByteDance, the original Chinese owner, had to slash its stake down to just under 20%. The majority of the company is now in the hands of a group led by the American tech company Oracle, plus a bunch of other American and non-Chinese investors. Oracle really became the hero of this whole story. As this big, trusted American tech company, they stepped up to take on the massive job of managing the new company and, this is the most important part, securing all of the American user data. And what's really crucial to understand is that these were not just promises on paper. We're talking about real structural changes. All US user data now lives on Oracle servers, here in the US. They're completely retraining the algorithm using only American data. And all the key decisions, from what content that's moderated to who's on the board, it's all now handled by a majority American team, based right here in the United States. So, crisis averted, right? The app was saved. Well, not so fast. The deal basically created this kind of uneasy truce. It was met with a whole mix of emotions, celebration from some, a lot of skepticism from others, and a ton of lingering questions about what happens next. On one hand, you just had this massive sigh of relief. Millions of users and creators had been protesting this thing for months, online and even right outside the Capitol. For them, like this sign says, the app wasn't just fun, it was their business, it was their community. Saving TikTok literally meant saving their livelihoods. But back in Washington, totally different story. It was completely split. President Trump was out there declaring victory, I saved TikTok. But a lot of lawmakers and security folks were still really wary. You had Senator Ed Markey complaining about a lack of transparency, and experts started asking, hey, does ByteDance's remaining stakes still pose a real risk? And that's the thing, this issue isn't really over. The bans on using TikTok on government phones and devices, those are still in place. Congress is already making noise about launching new investigations into the deal, and honestly, a different president down the line could just decide this agreement isn't good enough and try to unwind the whole thing. When you step back and look at the whole picture, the TikTok saga is really the perfect symbol of our times. It's this fun, creative, cultural phenomenon that got caught smack in the middle of a huge geopolitical fight between the world's two biggest powers over data, influence, and who's going to dominate technology. Which leaves us with one final big question. Was this deal the end of the story? A one-of-a-kind solution to a really thorny problem? Or was this whole crazy episode just the first major battle in a new, unfolding tech Cold War? For now, I guess those 200 million Americans are just happy they can keep scrolling.